Our guest and keynote speaker, Stephen Manchester, #1 national best-selling author, is going to be presenting Finding Your Strengths as a Writer. Take it away, Stephen.
Thank you, Madeline. I appreciate it. And I'd like to thank Moonlighters Inc. for inviting me today to speak. It's so important for us to stay connected, right? Especially now where it's so difficult to get out and about into the community. But, to share this, share ideas and with folks who have that same passion for the writing craft. I mean, I've been at this for 30 years. I'm still super passionate about writing, also about, working with other writers and trying to help them whenever I can. A little background on me. My grandfather was an amazing storyteller. He was actually an old swamp Yankee out of Westport. Never put pen to paper, but he could spin a tale, right? And I remember being very young thinking, words have power, right? They can make you laugh, cry, but most of all, they connect us. I didn't realize then that he had planted a seed in me that would come to fruition years later. But I did, even when I was young, I knew that I wanted to be a storyteller as well, right? Not necessarily a writer, but somebody who could entertain, right, with stories. Fast forward 20 years, I'm working for the Massachusetts Department of Correction. I get activated for Operation Desert Storm. So to say that was a difficult experience is an understatement. And to make a very long story short, we ended up landing in Saudi Arabia on a C-5A Galaxy. For anybody who knows anything about the military, this is like the second largest aircraft in the world. There are 5 decks inside the plane. The bottom deck alone holds 8 Greyhound buses side by side. We flew for 18 hours, seated backwards, no windows. We drop into Saudi Arabia, and we were actually there for the ground war, where they had bombed Iraq for 41 days. And my job was a squad leader. I was in the United States Army military police. And my job essentially was to run a squad of 15 people from Saudi Arabia into Iraq. Essentially, the mission was to collect EPWs, or enemy prisoners of war, and to get past this berm, which was about 60 feet off the desert floor. And I'm only giving you some of this context to show you where, I made the final decision to chase my dream down. Saddam Hussein said it would take the Americans 6 months to get to the breach. It actually took us 17 minutes. But to explain some of the carnage, and if I've been writing again for 30 years, I've written 24 books. If I wrote 24 books on the subject, I'm not sure I could capture some of the emotions that go into something like that. I mean, it took me literally 5 years to come back, to who I was. And we didn't spend a whole lot of time in the desert, but it was enough to kind of, change my life on a dime, right? So again, without getting into the graphic detail, I ended up flipping a Humvee, moving from Iraq into Saudi Arabia with my platoon sergeant. We hit a boulder with the right front tire in the middle of a dust storm. And the reason that this is significant is we were still in Iraq at the time. The sun was going down, and the antenna was crushed, so I couldn't call in for help. So we were basically there alone for about 3 hours. And within those 3 hours, I really had to make a decision. What do I want to do with the rest of my life, right? So I'm in law enforcement. I'm working in the prison system. I was an investigator. I was skilled as a soldier. And I'm 23 years old, and I feel like I'm about 70. And I remember my grandfather. And I remember standing there in the desert thinking, not if, but when I make it home, I'm going to chase my dream down and become a writer. And I'm not a foolish man. I know that, to become a published author, it kind of hovers around 97% for the rejection rate. So you can either look at that, or you can say, listen, there's 3% for the rest of us, right, to get in there and make some success of it. And because it's so challenging to take up, it was really something that I wanted to take on. So without further ado, let me get in and share my PowerPoint presentation, which will also be the handout. And it's something that I wanted to offer as a handout. It's a little bit busy, but also very intentional, right? So figuring out your strengths as a writer. All right, so the first thing you need to do is ask yourself some questions. Again, I've written more than 24 books, right? I still have to ask myself these questions. People say, well, how long does it take you to write a book? For me, because I storyboard now, probably between 6 to 9 months, right? And if I'm going to spend that much time and give up that much time in my life, it better be something that I want to write about, right? Something that I feel emotional or passionate about. And I presume everybody who's on this call is also a writer. So you have to really ask yourself, right? What do I really want to write about? What's in my heart? What's going to be, because there are going to be times when you don't want to write it. right? I mean, this is a bit of a neurotic thing where you spend a lot of time alone and there's research involved. You have to have that passion. If you don't have it up front, you're never ever going to have it toward the tail end to be able to finish your project. And if I were writing only for myself, what would I write? I mean, it's a bit cliche in the industry now, but people always say, write the book that you want to read. For me, I love to read as much as I love to write, and there are more than one book, right? There's more than one book that I wanted to read. So I wrote everything that I could. For me, I really, really kind of hone in on family. I write about family dysfunction, and I really write for my kids. And I want everybody to take this the right way. But when I first started, you give your left arm to be published. Now, for me, when I write a book, as long as I know my kids may read it to their children and their children's children, that's enough for me. And the rest really becomes a byproduct of that. So when you have the answers to something about, what is, what's the theme of this book, right? What's the plot? What is that, one or two sentences that I get super excited about that I'm going to spend the next year or two of my life? You have to have that down. You do. Right. And then you have to ask yourself another question, right? How comfortable and skilled am I with this sort of writing? I don't write horror. I don't write, thrillers, fantasy. I don't feel comfortable in that genre, right? So for me, I write what I feel comfortable about, and again, what I feel passionate about. Ironically enough, having a background in law enforcement and the military, I'm now known for writing tear jerkers, male perspective to a female audience, which is a little bit bizarre that I'm sitting here today talking about that. I would have never guessed it, several decades ago, but that's my wheelhouse. That's what I feel really, really comfortable about. For me, a good writer will make somebody think. A great writer will make somebody feel. And I will not put pen to paper if I'm not shooting for greatness. I may not achieve it, but that's the goal, right? For me, it's about, I'm going to sit down, and if I can't laugh while I'm writing, then I don't expect my readers to laugh. If I cannot cry and be comfortable crying, then I don't expect my readers to do that either. So really, these first questions, you need to be really honest with yourself. The second process is reading. And I've read, especially early on in my career, I read a lot of, books that talked about, how do you write, how do you get connected, getting agents, publishers, all that other stuff. Really, it's about filling your toolbox, right? So I am a voracious reader when I can. And really, if I'm being honest, I put about 3 months aside, usually in the summer, where I'll read everything that I can get into me, right? And then when I'm writing, I actually put that down. I mean, there's nothing. I think I've been writing so long, and my style is unique enough where I'm not sure I could ever be accused of plagiarism. But there are times, and everybody who writes on this, on this webinar knows, you'll be reading something and you really love the passage, and how people, a certain writer will transition from one scene into the next. And then, the next day I'm writing and I'm tapping away on the keys, and I sit back and I look at it and I'm thinking, wow, that seems a little bit familiar, right? Not the same words, but maybe not my style. So I say, friendly reminder, just be really, really cognizant when you're in the process of writing, and if you're reading at the same time, that you don't become so impressionable that the work's not yours. And again, I'm not trying to imply plagiarism here by any stretch. I'm talking about having your style, your voice, and being unique in that. And when it's all said and done, reading really does help you to find your strengths, right? I read books and I think to myself, and here's a cool decision that I made early on as well. I do not compete against other writers. And I know a lot of writers who are competitive, which is fine, right? And it's, it's a bottom line driven business. For me, you can look at the dollar signs, or you can look at your readership, right? How many people have I connected with, right? For every book that's sold, I'm told that there's 3 people that read that book, right? So for me, it's about connecting with people. And again, that money, the accolades, that all becomes a byproduct of producing work in which you can connect with other people. So for me, when I'm reading something, I really do ask myself, like, how talented is this person? And could I write something like this? And early on, thankfully, I was more confident than I should have been. And I'd be like, yeah, I could do this, right? And then you start, cutting your teeth, or, getting that practice. You need that seat time, right? And I don't realize for the first 10 years, I don't even really know how to write, right? I'm reading and I'm writing and I'm reading and I'm writing, and you really need to put the seat time in. I tell my kids the same thing, right? The kid across the street, he's shooting baskets. My kid's shooting baskets, starts drizzling out. My kid comes in the house, the other kid's still out there shooting baskets. I say to him, Ev, it's not a big deal either way, but if there's 3 seconds left on the clock, who are they passing the ball to? You have to put the seat time in, right? And that also goes with your research. And for me, that research, part of that research is in reading. A lot of people won't read what they write. I say that's absolutely insanity. You should be swimming in the same pool in which your work is involved, right? If you're writing fantasy, you should be reading fantasy. And a rising tide carries all ships. And what I say by that is one of the first books I published was called The Unexpected Storm. And there were other writers who had actually put out books on Desert Storm. I was invited to go speak down in Washington, D.C. on the 10-year anniversary of the liberation of Kuwait. I found out that another writer tried to put the kibosh on it so that he could take the spotlight on it. I actually called him and I said, I got to tell you, what a foolish decision on your part, because all of my readers, I would thank, graciously turn on to your book, right? And thinking that they're going to do the same thing, you're going to do the same thing for me, because people are topical, right? If I read something on Vietnam, then I usually read 7, 8, 9, 10 books on Vietnam before I exhaust, my interest in it. So keep that in mind. I mean, a lot of people who are writers, will cover their work and think, I'm not sharing, and I'm not sharing my readers and this and that. That's the craziest thing you can do. If you want to expand your readership, then you have to network. And if you're not networking with other writers, then you're absolutely crazy. Storyboard. When I first started, one of my traditional publishers, a guy by the name of Lou Aronica. So he ran Avon and he ran Bantam Dell for years. He goes into quasi-retirement. He opens up this boutique shop out of Stamford, Connecticut. I ended up signing a 5-book deal with him. And in the beginning, he used to laugh and say, listen, you're like the kitchen sink. You just throw everything into a book and, how long does it take you to write a book, Steve? I said, well, at the time, it was like maybe 12, 14 months. And he said, why don't we talk about storyboarding, which I was reluctant to even jump into, because for me, a storyboard is like going back to the 7th grade and being taught how to, put an outline together. So what you're doing is you're restricting me, right? What I don't realize is a storyboard actually frees you up. If you can put it down in the beginning, right? So what's my plot line? Super excited about it. I go out for dinner with everybody on this call. I said, listen, this is what my next book's about. I'm really, really excited about it, right? Everybody can feel that excitement. From there, who are the characters? The reason I've been as successful as I am, because I spend a lot of time developing characters, a lot of time. And because I write emotional works, unless you become endeared to the character, love or hate, I don't care, as long as we avoid indifference, those characters are going to tell the story for me. And if I spend that much time up front, I don't have to worry about, what Grandpa John's going to do or say or how he's going to react to something, because I've already developed him. I already know who he is. Scene setting, same deal, right? I wrote a book called The Rocking Chair. I based it in Montana. Absolute insanity. I've never been to Montana. So you wouldn't believe the research I had to do on dairy farming, on the vegetation, what the weather's like, the way that they speak, their dialect. Nicholas Sparks, all of his books take place in North Carolina. He's from North Carolina. Stephen King, everything takes place in Maine. Make sure your setting is what you're familiar with, so you don't have to put all that time and effort in. You don't need to do that. Creating a detailed storyboard is basically, here's my plot line, here's my characters, just like you're in a class of 3rd graders, 5 senses. What does this person look like? Maybe they smell of mothballs, right? The voice is kind of gruff. I don't even have to tell you that they've been smoking for 30 years if I explain the voice well enough. So by developing all that stuff up front, to me, that's what a storyboard is. And I'll go back to The Rocking Chair. I'm writing this novel, and I know that this is definitely how the book starts. This is definitely how the book ends. And we're just going to kind of do that. So if you think about a storyboard, for me, here's your parameters. You don't have to go straight up the middle. You can kind of, do one of these as you're going, but you have to stay on that road. I need to get to the end, at the end of that roadmap to get, to get to the finish and how I want to finish. One of the secondary characters was selling pigeons. I fell in love with this guy. I stopped writing about him. And then I realized when I spoke to the copy editor, right, later on, that, why'd you go off on the tangent, right? Keep it on. And that's why you use a storyboard. You spend the time up front so you don't have to meander, right? And be all over the place down the road. And if anybody wants a little bit more on that, because I don't have the time to get into detail, I am reachable, I'm approachable. You can send me an email, whatever you want to do, Facebook, and I'm happy to get into the storyboarding with you, right? And part of the storyboarding too is you can identify your writing strengths. For me, for a while, my probably the weakest part of my writing was dialogue. So I'd go to the mall with my kids. I'd sit down in the food court before everybody had to wear 3 masks, right? And I would sit there and listen to the way people talk. And then I realized nobody's actually finishing a sentence. right? People are jumping over each other. There's a hum, huh, this and that. You can tell somebody stops, they're thinking about something else. So you have that internal dialogue. The more time I took, like really intentionally listening to the way that people kind of talk with each other, the stronger the dialogue became. And the stronger the dialogue became meant that I had to now strengthen my scene settings, right? So storyboarding, again, feel free to reach out to me. We can get into more about that. Once you get done storyboarding, it's time to write. You better be excited about it because you're going to be spending some time, right? You're going to be spending a lot of time, and everybody on this call knows that. Trick to finding your true style is to pen what you love to read, right? If you hate horrors, you probably shouldn't be writing horrors. You should be writing what excites you, right? And please don't be, how do I put this the right way? Don't be intimidated by other people's writing, right? Don't worry about competing with another writer. Even if you don't have certain strengths, you're going to build them as you go. All I'm saying to you in this entire presentation is be really honest with yourself, right? If you know that, I'm really strong in this area, but I'm not so strong in that area, then start doing your research. Start reading, other authors, right, who are very strong in that area, and start to build your craft. This is not an overnight deal by any stretch. Again, I've been writing for 30 years, and I think I probably just hit, I was just able to hit the ground running, right? So I just finally learned that I can write anything I want. And because of the passion that I have for it, and, I've shown enough perseverance that I could start any project and finish it. That's pretty much the only thing I can guarantee myself. I tell people that this is as much a discipline as it is a passion. I don't write on Christmas. I don't write on Sundays. My family comes first. But if you and I meet in the market and you say, hey, Steve, I'm working on a book, and I say, okay, what's it about? Again, you should be excited when you explain the plot line to me, right? 1 or 2 sentences, that whole elevator pitch. And then I say, well, are you working on it right now? Well, I haven't really touched it in the last 3 or 4 weeks. Well, maybe you should actually pick up a different project. And I'm not saying things don't come up in this world, especially with COVID and all this other craziness, that's going on. But if you are not so excited that it becomes, in the morning, I'm thinking about a character, at night, I'm thinking about, maybe I should switch up the scene setting. I really tell people I live in 2 worlds at one time. When I'm writing a novel, I'm 8 years old in my head, imagining all this stuff and creating this new world with new characters. And then the more important version of me is what goes on, day to day. Again, the family comes first, but you really, really, really have to immerse yourself in it. And I can tell now, having the experience that I do, the writers that put that time and effort into it, right, and become so immersed in their work that it becomes real. I write fiction, but it's as real to me as any of the nonfiction I've ever penned. And that's the truth. Seat time, all about seat time, right? Some people say 10,000 hours. I mean, who knows, right? People use the word master. That actually makes me laugh. I am not a writer because that's what I do. I'm a writer because that's who I am. And I'll be writing probably the day before I leave the earth, right? Because it's what I love to do. It's my expression. It's how I connect with other people, whether they be family, friends, or strangers. But throughout it, I'm also a student of the game. So I'm constantly trying to figure out how I can strengthen some of the weaker parts of it and how I can take my strengths and maybe help other people to become stronger as well. Forget these 3 cliches, right? But they're really, really true, right? Show, don't tell. Do not tell us that your protagonist is angry. Paint the picture of the red face, nostrils flaring, right? Clenched fists, familiar material. We went over that a little bit. Don't spend time doing all kinds of research on a place when you can act, if you're talking about a restaurant in Idaho, and then you can, rather than just talking about, the favorite restaurant of your family that you've been going to for 30 years. You don't have to do any research there. It comes from your heart, right? So as soon as you pour it out onto paper, people will feel like they're there as well. And less is more. Those 3 months, if I'm on the beach or I'm on vacation and I'm reading, book after book, if I have to stop more than 3 times to look up what a word is, then I'm done reading your stuff, right? I'm not here, people read for 2 reasons. One is to escape. The other is to learn something. Nonfiction, normally I'm trying to learn something, right? Fiction, let me escape. I don't want to, think about my electric bill or having to go back to work on Monday. So our job is to help people to escape into another world. By giving a vocabulary lesson, you're actually not doing that, right? Just by putting your name on a cover, people will think you're intelligent. You don't need to really get into that whole thesaurus thing. And I say, again, people, I'm a best-selling author, I'm an author, I'm a writer, I'm actually a storyteller. And the more experience I get, the less I get into this extravagant vocabulary. I tell a story the way that, you'd want to hear it on a porch, right? Sitting in a rocking chair. And that's my style. Next is editing. This is a very, very difficult thing to get into. I will say this, if you can find a good editor, and I'm not talking about a frustrated writer here, I'm talking about finding somebody who's a true editor, because it's a different art form, right? It's like, having your fourth grade teacher who's at the punctuation and grammar tied into where are the big holes in the story. The character was there in chapter 4, dropped off until chapter 7. What happened to the character? The plot line was supposed to be this. You took a right and kept going. You didn't stay on the highway. A good editor will actually sit down and make your work better and make you see things that you can't see. The process for me is once I write a book, I'll edit it 2 to 3 times. Usually about 2 times, put it in my desk drawer, come back to it a month later. That'll be the last time I'm able to see anything. It then goes out to a copy editor. I work with 2 of them, both of them out of the Midwest. For anybody who's looking, and this is the only place I've ever paid money for my writing. Industry standard is $3 to $5 per double space page. You could probably get a really good copy editor for $3. If you don't spend the money, don't expect your manuscript to be pristine. The major difference between traditionally published authors and indie authors, and I'm going to tell you, indie authors are starting to come right up to par on this. But the reason that indie authors got a bad name is because they did not put in the time and effort, right? To go out and because if I sign a contract with a traditional publisher, they're going to want to assign an editor to that. That editor is going to make sure that there are no errors. If I don't spend the $700 or $1,200, whatever it is, to hire a copy editor for my independently published book, then there are going to be errors. There are going to be holes in the book, right? So it's your name on the cover. This is the only place I tell people, if you're going to spend money, spend it there. And if you're really looking for an editor and you're not sure how to, then reach out to me and I'll hook you up with somebody. This is so important. I mean, I've worked with people early on where I realized, this person should be writing his or her own book, right? But instead they're bleeding red on mine, right? Or they don't like the type of style or genre that I write. I have a friend who shows me a manuscript. The thing is all red. You can't even read. It's just bled red onto it. And the kid, it's a crime thriller. So I said, does the editor enjoy crime thrillers? I said, I don't, he says, I don't think so. I agree with you. She doesn't. You picked the wrong editor, right? You're not looking for somebody who's kind. You're looking for somebody who's honest. And it's a back and forth, and it needs to be a trust that's set up there. They are going to not only point out some of your strengths, but they're going to point out your weaknesses. And I'm going to tell you, after a couple dozen books, 30 years in the seat, I'll get a letter back from the copy editor, and I actually have to toggle off the laptop and go take a walk. Then I come back and I'm like, no, I'm not doing it. And then I think about it, I toggle off, I go for another walk. I come back, I'm like, she's a lot smarter than I am. Should I consider it? Toggle off again. So really the bottom line is, do you want to take in that, constructive criticism and get better, get stronger, right? Nobody should impose on your style of voice, nobody. And you have the final say. You are the author of your work, right? But the editor, if you have the right one, will not only get into the mechanics of it, but will actually point out some of the things that are missing, whether it be timeline. And I have a book that's coming out in June. I just worked with the copy editor on it. Fortunately, well, hopefully I'm getting better, so the letters aren't as rough, but I take it to heart. And there's always an enormous thank you at the end of it. Thank you for making this a better work. It's not her job to say, hey, Steve, this doesn't work, so I need you to do it this way. It's her job to say, hey, Steve, this doesn't work. Maybe you can strengthen it. It's still my writing, right? It's still my writing. It's just a decision as to whether or not I want to strengthen that writing. And because I consider myself a professional, I put the time in, as painful as it is. Solicit feedback. This is tough early on. There are people, if you ever have to pay for a review, then it's an enormous disservice, not just to yourself, but to your readers as well. Don't ever pay for reviews. And if you want to spend money on a contest, before you do that, send me a message. Maybe we'll go out for lunch. We'll spend some of that money on lunch and talk about writing, right? It's a waste of money. If I'm running a contest and I'm friends with 5 of you people on this webinar today, and all 5 of you submit along with 100 other people, do you not think that you have an advantage? Right? Contests are normally won before they're ever even, decided or judged. And I'm not saying once you have a finished book that you can't go out and, do some of the book festivals. I still do. And the only reason I do is I don't need the pat on the back of the accolade, but it plays very well on social media. And when you have a book that comes out, anybody who's ever released a book knows after the first 6 to 9 months, it's really, really hard to stay relevant. You know, how many copies can you sell to your mother, right? So in order to expand your audience, and that's really what it's about. How do I continue to reach out, right? Part of the way to do that is to get to solicit feedback. Early on, when I was, you know, getting published for the first few books, I would wait until the book was released. Now, I bring together a beta team. I do pre-publication book reviews, and if you're taking notes, please write that down now. Pre-publication book reviews. There's no reason if your book isn't copied and pristine that you can't get reviews before the book's even published, which will actually help you to land a better agent and publisher. Or if you're going to self-publish it and be, you know, an indie author, that's just as good, right? You're putting all that work up front, right? But the bottom line is this: anybody who's going to give you feedback, and don't get me wrong, like Goodreads, I'll throw my book out on Goodreads and then I'll never go back and look at it because people are cruel. Amazon, if you don't have at least 50 reviews on Amazon, then you're not even considered to be in the game according to their algorithms. So bear that in mind. That holds a lot of weight. When it comes to reviews, or, you know, and this is part of the feedback, if you're not, you know, asking people to put reviews up on Amazon for you, you're making a mistake. You need to do that. And that's how Amazon kind of, you know, not that they're going to go out and promote you like they would Grisham, but at least you're in the game, right? But it's all about getting that objective feedback, internalizing it. You may, once a book's published, if somebody says, hey, I love the book, or I hated the book, it doesn't keep me up at night, right? But if you give me some feedback that I can use for my next book, then I can become stronger as a writer. All I'm saying is be open to that. Right. You know, it's funny, when I first started teaching, I was teaching out in Providence and down the Cape, and, you know, I tell people, like, well, they're like, well, what's the, you know, how do you become a writer? And I'm like, well, you got to get yourself a pad of paper, right, and a pen. And they'd laugh, or they think I'm being sarcastic. It's as easy as that. You have to put the time in, and you have to write. And again, the research, a lot of that has to do with the reading. If it's not real to you when you're putting it down on paper, then it's not going to be real to somebody else. And even if you are writing fiction, if you don't do the research and make the story feel like it's real, then it's an enormous mistake. People are going to disconnect from it, right? You want to bring people in that first page, which is your hook. You know, if you're going to spend an hour on each page, you're spending 10 to 20 hours on the first page, about the same on the last page, right? Hook them in, send them home, you know, just wowed, and do the best you can in the middle, right? But it's all about writing. It's about committing yourself to it, being disciplined in it, and remembering why you started to begin with, right? Don't ever let that passion go. All right, so we're at 1:30. I think I have like about 10 minutes, 5 to 10 minutes to take questions, which I wanted to do, and we're also going to have a Q&A at the end, which I'm excited about at 4 o'clock. So I get to join the panel and answer some of those questions. But you know, I've been at this for a long time. It doesn't necessarily have to be as far as strengths go, but if you have any questions, please feel free to ask.
We do have one question ready right now in the chat.
Okay.
So I'll read that out for you. You sort of touched on this. This is from Jess Wads. You sort of touched on this subject already, but here goes. I noticed your books have won multiple awards. Number one, how do you find out about these different writing contests? And number two, how do you know if they are legit? Number three, how do you know if an entry fee is too big?
Yeah, that's a good question. So if I'm working with a traditional publisher, it's actually that publisher's job to go in and take care of that. My publisher's been really, really good about it, the Story Plant. And again, because it plays very well on social media, right? You never want to, you know, enter a contest that is illegitimate. There were a few that I questioned, and I can give you kind of a anecdotal story on that, but there was this one company that runs like the New York Book Festival, the Paris Book Festival, and it's somewhat questionable, right? You look at the amount of people that are, and the entry fees like $50, like, I don't know. I enter it. I end up winning the Amsterdam Book Festival. I think it was in 2018, but they flew me and my wife to Paris, right? We had dinner, and I remember coming home, and a week later, somebody had actually asked me whether or not it was legitimate, you know, whether or not the award was legitimate or the contest. And I saw for $50, right? We ended up in Paris. If it was illegitimate, I'd like to go on that path again. When I'm talking about contests, I'm actually talking about short stories, poems. When you enter these contests out of a magazine, from a writer's perspective, do not do that. When you have a finished product, when you have a book, it makes sense to enter these awards, even if you get an honorable mention. Again, this is something that you can use. You can pad your bio with it. Once you win an award, nobody can take it away from you. And you'd rather be an award-winning author than an author, right? And then you become a best-selling author, then you become a national best-selling author, you go to #1. There's all these different accolades. Obviously, every one of us is trying to get to the New York Times bestsellers list, which is really, really difficult. Years ago, Avenue of the Americas in New York City, you drive down there was publishers on both sides. There are only 5 left, 5 conglomerates left, right? So that leaves the rest of the market for people who are writing indie stuff, or working with these boutique or like kind of Midland type publishing houses. So do the research, and if you have any questions, again, feel free to reach out to me, and I'll tell you just by experience, because I've looked into a lot of them. My newest book is The Menu, which is up on the screen right now. Again, my average book takes me 6 to 9 months to write. This book took me close to 10 years that I've been kind of putting around with it because I wanted to get it right. And I reached out to, Mr. Young, right, and other, Christian writers, because it was on the border between, walking on razor's edge between commercial and Christian. But I'm entering some of the contests with this book because it's a different market. I'm normally in a commercial market, right? I actually write women's fiction. Now all of a sudden, this is like a spiritual or inspirational book, so it's winning awards in different Christian markets. So it's good for the book. It's good for the book. As far as for me, they'll send you medals, and I put everything in a box, right? It's not. It's nice to have that when you put into your signature award-winning author, and it does play. Believe it or not, it actually plays with people where, let me check this person out. Average reader in the United States reads 3 to 4 books a year. You need to build yourself up and be honest about it. Don't ever lie, but don't hide it either, right? Because why would I want to try out a new author when I know if I read Stephen King or I read Clancy, I know exactly what I'm going to get. I'm only reading 3 or 4 books a year. So for me to try somebody new, I'm going to do a little bit of research. If that person's an award-winning author, then somebody thought enough about that work that, hey, let me give it a shot. Very, very long way to answer that question, but I hope I did.
We have a few more questions.
Yeah.
All right, next, this is from Ken Brock, who's actually presenting later. Thank you, Ken, for throwing your question down. Your advice to invest in editing is valuable. Do you distinguish between paying for a copy editor and so-called developmental editor? It sounded like you feel it's worth it for yourself anyway, hiring a copy editor only.
Yes. Copy editor. I've never worked with a developmental editor because it's almost like a collaboration. Anybody on this webinar who's ever co-authored with somebody, you've actually taken time off your life, right? It's a very difficult process. A developmental editor is basically you coming to somebody saying, listen, I have this idea, but it's not developed, right? You and I could spend 20 minutes, any one of you could spend 20 minutes on the telephone and I explain to you really the fundamentals of storyboarding, and you can save your money with a developmental editor. In fact, you may end up going the wrong direction because you have this idea, but you're not quite sure. So for me, I'd rather spend the time letting this thing stew, right, than go with a developmental editor. That being said, on the other hand, a copy editor, invaluable. There's no way I would be as successful as I am without having had several very talented copy editors. Rumor has it Harper Lee, they still talk about Harper Lee and, To Kill a Mockingbird, which to me is literary, perfection, right? But there's a question as to whether or not she was the brilliant one or it was the copy editor, right? And because we're all writers, we're going to give her credit for it all day long, right? Which we should. But that's not to say there wasn't somebody, kind of whispering in her ear and directing her left, right, and center. If you find the right one, your writing career is going to take a significant turn for the better. Absolutely. Thank you, Ken.
All right, this is going to be our last question for Stephen for now, but we are going to have a full presenter panel at 4:00. So anyone who wants to ask Stephen another question will be able to do so at 4, okay? So our last question from Keith. I'm struggling to find an excellent editor in the fantasy, sci-fi, Christian genres. I had one editor charge me $375 for a 5,000 word short story. How much does a good editor cost me for a manuscript that contains 70,000 words?
Well, every other place in this industry, it's all about word count, right? If you talk about page count, then you don't know what you're talking about. When somebody asks you, how long's your book, you give them the word count. When it comes to copy editors, it's about page count, and it's about double spaced, right? So I mean, I've been doing it for years on the side, right? So I'll pick up a job, and for $3 a double spaced page, so you figure that out, 70,000 words, whatever it is, 280 pages, 300 pages, it's $3 per page. So it'd be about $900 to do that. But again, if you find the right person, and most copy editors that are worth his or her salt will take an excerpt of your book, edit it, send it back to you, and then you decide whether or not you want to work with this person, right? It should almost be like an audition. They're working for you, not the other way around. $375 for a short story is absolutely ridiculous. It's highway robbery. And to make you feel better about yourself, I've been, people have stolen from me too, right? But not anymore. I've actually found the right people. And again, if you reach out to me, I'm sure we can find the right person for you. That's my story, sad but true.
Thank you so much, Steve. Again,
thank you.
Anyone who has a question for Steve, come back at 4 p.m.
Eastern Standard. I'll be here.
Right, Eastern Standard Time.
Thank you.
We are on the internet, and you know how it is.
Let me stop.
So see you in a bit, Steve.
Thank you so much.